This is CryptoHolics, Ep.02, with your host, Bill Cassidy. Don't forget to come discuss today's episode at CryptoChat.io. Thank you for tuning in. Today I've got two guests. My first guest is Riccardo Spagni, aka Fluffy Pony from Monero. Riccardo is very knowledgeable about cryptocurrencies, software development, and cryptography. He's been involved with cryptocurrency-related projects since 2012. Welcome to the show, Riccardo. Happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And my other guest is Gary Lee, co-founder and lead developer for Zcoin, which offers private financial transactions, and those transactions are enabled by the Zcoin protocol. Gary studied at Dartmouth College and was the recipient of the Thiel Fellowship 20 Under 20 grant. Welcome to the show, Gary. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. I'm going to be asking each of you a series of questions about the projects you are involved with. After that, I'd like you guys to have a discussion about which privacy technology could prevail in the long run and why. So we're going to go ahead and start it off with Riccardo from Monero. Riccardo, can you give us a short history about the Monero project and how it got started and how it got to where it is today?
Sure. So Monero was launched in early 2014 by a guy called Thankful for Today. And sort of very early on, within a couple of weeks, Thankful for Today didn't play very well with the community. And so the community ended up forking the project away from him. And I was one of the 7 people involved in that. And we've pretty much been running it and running with it since then.
Can you tell us what enables Monero users to send private transactions?
Sure. So Monero basically has 3 facets when it comes to its privacy. Or transactional privacy specifically. The first is that it obscures where transactions come from, and it uses something called ring signatures for this. And basically, every transaction appears to come from a number of old transactions. And to an observer who's trying to analyze the blockchain, they can't tell which of those old transactions is the one that it really comes from, it's really spending. And then there's also, on an output basis, transactions are not paid to an address like you would expect in Bitcoin, at least not an address that you can see on the blockchain, but it appears to go to this random public key. And again, to an outside observer looking at the blockchain, they can't tell if 2 outputs in a transaction or multiple outputs from multiple transactions are going to the same person or going to different people. There's nothing that they can really glean from that. And then lastly, there's transactional amounts. And with Monero, we obscure transactional amounts using something that's based on confidential transactions that Greg Maxwell thought up. And we've built on that and innovated on that to create an innovative ring signature scheme that we call ring CT, or ring confidential transactions. So basically, when you use Monero, you can't see where a transaction comes from, you can't see where it's going to, and you can't see how much the amount is.
Okay. And all 3 of those facets, right? They all interlink with each other. Would one not be able to work without the other?
Yeah, to some degree, they play off each other. For example, the fact that you can have a ring signature that builds from multiple transactions, or that appears to spend from multiple transactions, regardless of the amount that's in the outputs of those transactions, only works because ring CT works.
Okay.
So there's a lot of sort of interconnectivity and interplay between those features.
Is every transaction on the Monero network private?
Yes. Every transaction is private. There's no way to opt out of it. Ring CT is very new and is only mandatory on testnet. It will become mandatory on Monero's mainnet, but that'll only happen with our hard fork next year, September. So it's basically like on mainnet, let's call it 90% there until the hard fork next year, September.
Okay. Can you tell us what kind of goals the Monero team has set for itself over the next year or two?
Sure. There's, I suppose, unlike a lot of other projects, there's no real Monero team that is sort of centrally managing things. There is the Monero core team, which is responsible for stewardship of the project. But in terms of goals and a lot of that stuff, it comes out of community members and researchers and contributors and developers saying, oh, yeah, something cool that I think we should work on, or it would be nice if we had such and such a feature. So, for example, one of the things that that we're quite proud of that we've been working on for like the past year and a bit already is something called Kovri, which is a open source I2P router. And I2P is like Tor, but it's an alternative to Tor that handles the way it mixes traffic slightly differently. And it's basically a low latency mixnet. And with I2P, currently, if you want to use I2P, the router is written in Java. And we didn't like the fact that integrating I2P in Monero would add a Java dependency. And so we inherited this project, which was a fork of an existing attempted an I2P router. And the past year and a bit, it's been plugged away at. It's quite a usable I2P router at the moment, albeit in still very early stages in some ways. But I use it to sit in RC2P and that sort of thing all the time, and it's stable. And ultimately, the goal with that is to integrate it into Monero in such a way that nobody will even be able to tell that you're running a Monero node. Or even if they can tell that you're running a Monero node, they won't be able to tell the origin of a transaction, even if they have loads of their own nodes set up.
That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been this sort of like all-encompassing approach to privacy. We're not just focusing on one thing. So Kovri is a project that in and of itself is complete. It's got its own contributors, some of which overlap with Monero, but some of which don't. It has its own sort of identity and everything. And so even though it lives on the Monero project repo, and even though it uses a lot of the Monero infrastructure, it's still like if Monero had to disappear, Kovri could still continue as its own open source project. Nice. And that's pretty cool. So, a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do moving forward will hopefully work in the same way. Instead of just bolting things on top of Monero or just slapping features in, we're trying to see ways that we can use some of the infrastructure and the contributors and the innovation and build out entirely separate projects that can be useful to the broader privacy community for years and decades to come.
Right. Privacy is important, and I'm wondering, why do you think it's important for cryptocurrency users and really just internet users in general?
I think that the problem is that for so long we have ignored the need for privacy as internet users in general. And it's gotten to a point where we're willing to sell our soul and all of our data just so that we can play Farmville on Facebook. And that's a pretty shocking state of affairs.
Yeah.
And I really think it's time that we took back our privacy in many ways. So if I pay somebody, why should they know that, or why should they be able to see my bank balance? And if I pay someone, why should they be able to see other payments I've made? So it's really all about taking back privacy and being able to use services that they don't even have to be decentralized. But I'd rather pay for a service in a private way and then have full use of that service, then get fed ads based on my likes and dislikes that are inferred from purchase history and browsing history, just so I can get an email inbox for free.
And the average user doesn't really understand that concept, the trade-off that they're making there. They think, oh, this is free, I'm good to go, but there is an actual trade-off, and it's basically your information.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that we're doing to try and change that, but it's going to take a lot of effort, and I think more than the technical solutions that we're coming up with, it's going to take a lot of education and a lot of time for people to become educated and to change.
Can you tell me if you think the dash mixing is relevant in any way for private transactions?
I think that anything like that where it's not mandatory by default, where it's optional privacy, I think in any environment like that, you're going to end up with low entropy. You're going to end up with a very low mix set, as we had right at the beginning. So to give you a little bit of background, right at the beginning with Monero, you could create a transaction that didn't mix with older transactions. And that was, you had to specify the level of privacy that you wanted. So 0 was basically an open transaction that anyone could see where it came from.
Yeah.
And then, you'd specify at the higher level, depending on the number of transactions you wanted to mix with. And what we found was that something crazy like 96 or 97% of transactions just used a mix-in of 0 because people were lazy. And these were early adopters. These were the sort of people that you would expect would go, I'm using a privacy-centric cryptocurrency, and I want things to be private, and so I'm going to take advantage of the privacy features, and yet people were just not.
Right.
So if that was the status quo with early adopters who understood the technology, how much worse would it be if we still allowed mix-in 0 transactions today? And we don't. They're banned on the network. And have been for ages. But it just goes to show that a lack of mandatory privacy just means no one's going to use it, which means it's got no value, and people or someone will be able to trace transactions just due to the lack of use and the lack of entropy.
Right. I completely agree with that point. As a Dash user for 2 years, which I was, I literally, over that course of 2 years, used the mixing feature twice. And one of them was to make a how-to video to show people how to do it. The fact that it's an option takes it away, it's almost like, why am I going to even do this? To be a little more lighthearted, can you tell us about that picture with you and Evan Duffield from the Satoshi Roundtable event last year? Give us a little context, maybe.
Yeah, it was just, at the end of the day, I can be a gigantic troll on Twitter, and I'm not going to deny the fact that I enjoy ribbing people, and I enjoy calling out stuff that I think is broken, that I think is a scam, that I think isn't going to work. And it doesn't mean that I dislike the person, or that I think that the individual is a terrible person and, should burn in the fiery pits or whatever. So, Evan and I had a chat, and I said, well, for posterity and just to really egg everyone on, let's take a photo. And we did, and we tweeted it out, and it had the desired effect. Everyone went a little bit crazy and didn't really know what to make of it.
We were all laughing.
Yeah, well, there we go. So that was the desired effect.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate it, Riccardo. We're going to switch gears here and go over to Gary now. Gary, can you tell us why did you start Zcoin?
Yeah, so I always came to Bitcoin with this kind of free market / very libertarian perspective of buy whatever you want, whenever you want, and wherever you want. And so after being fascinated with Silk Road, which we're actually donating 100 Zcoins each month to the creator of Silk Road for his defense fund. Nice. But after Silk Road, I realized that Bitcoin could be this new technology that could open up entirely new forms of commerce and be truly truly decentralized from the reins of regulation. And so after reading about the Bitcoin paper, which was one of the most kind of, in my opinion, most important papers of the 21st century, I came across the Zcoin paper in 2013. And so Zcoin, in contrast to Bitcoin, allowed for truly private transactions that do not have a link between sender and recipient. And it was also one of the most quoted, most cited cryptographic papers in 2013 and 2014, with around 200 citations from academic cryptographers, people that have dedicated decades of their life to studying cryptography. And after reading this paper, I realized that this Zcoin paper could allow for truly anonymous transactions that don't depend on heuristical threat models. So if you look at Bitcoin, which Satoshi cited as having pseudonymity and previous kind of coin join and mixing ring signature schemes, they all depend on heuristical threat models about what and they take into assumptions about what the privacy attack model actually is. And so with Zcoin, you actually can strip out all these heuristical attack models because the data simply isn't there. So in contrast to all previous cryptocurrencies, where the data is still present, linking transactions to other transactions, Zcoin doesn't have that data altogether. And so that quantum leap in terms of cryptographic structure is what's and what the bigger implications of that for free markets. That is what drew me to Zcoin. And Portman and I, Portman developed Vercoin, which was very briefly a very popular cryptocurrency a few years ago. We decided that Zcoin would be a very big deal in the near future and also future. And we decided to pursue this project.
And when did you guys launch Zcoin?
Yeah, so we launched this just about a month and a half ago.
Okay.
So, September 28th.
Great. So you're saying that the Zcoin technology is what allows Zcoin users to send anonymous private transactions?
Exactly. So Zcoin is the actual cryptocurrency for the Zcoin protocol, just like you have Bitcoin with a lowercase b, which is the protocol for Bitcoin with a capital B, the actual Bitcoin cryptocurrency.
Okay. Can you give us a quick technical aspect of how the Zcoin technology works?
Sure. So kind of a brief overview of what allows for zero knowledge transactions and what that actually means. It actually means so Zcoin uses zero knowledge proofs, and so zero knowledge proofs are pretty self-explanatory. What it means is that they prove if a statement is true or false without giving any other information whatsoever besides the fact that a given statement is true or false. So it's a very kind of binary cryptographic proof. So one example of a zero knowledge proof is Yale's Yale's socialist millionaire problem, which asks if two people, Alice and Bob, they want to find who is wealthier than whom. And so with the real world, Alice and Bob would have to talk to each other and say, Alice says, I have 100K, Bob says, I have 300K or whatever. And they compare their values and see who is wealthier than whom. But with a zero knowledge proof, they can actually do this kind of cryptographic magic and Alice essentially inputs her wealth, 100K, Bob inputs his wealth, 300K, and then through this cryptographic proof that isn't owned by a third party, it splits out 100% correct value of is Alice wealthier than Bob, or is Bob wealthier than Alice? But the key difference in comparison to other schemes that might happen in real life is that Alice, in the end of the day, doesn't know how much Bob has, and Bob doesn't know how much Alice has. So this is kind of a toy example of a zero-knowledge proof.
Riccardo and I were just speaking about how all transactions on Monero are private. You can't send a transaction without it being private. Is that how it's set up on Zcoin as well? And if not, do you guys plan on setting it up that way?
So by default, Zcoin is not sending private transactions right now. And as Riccardo said, it is a pretty big problem. And we just haven't flipped the switch, so to say. But there's nothing really preventing Zcoin from having private transactions by default. Just been stuck fixing a lot of random other bugs.
Right. Why do you think it's important for cryptocurrency users to have the option for private transactions?
Yeah, so I've always came to it from this free markets perspective, that so far for Coin, the most important use cases has been for speculation and for essentially essentially doing market activity that governments and other individuals or institutions wouldn't approve. And so in that sense, one of the biggest use cases for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is to allow for this kind of market activity. And privacy obviously is very essential to allowing for that, allowing for users to buy whatever the hell they want, whether it be drugs or even or a lot more legitimate, mundane things that you don't want, for which you don't want your privacy leaked.
Can you tell us what kind of goals you've set for yourself for the next year or two?
Yeah, so what's interesting about Zcoin is that because it doesn't rely on heuristical assumptions about threat models. It has an absolute perfect anonymity property. So because of that property, in terms of upgrading the protocol itself, there's really not much to do. But there's been a lot of smaller bugs that we have to keep fixing and maintaining. For example, we want to make the wallet load faster, and there's problems with usability. There's a lot of other tedious tasks, such as eventually we have to flip the switch to allow for all transactions to be private. So in terms of what there is to do in the long run, I'd say Zcoin is more similar to cryptocurrency like Bitcoin rather than something like Zcash or Ethereum. So the key things to do in the next year is actually just maintain the code, make it more usable, and fix bugs.
What is the difference between Zcash and Zcoin? Is there a difference? They're based off different privacy protocols?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that Zcoin and Zcash guarantee the same privacy process, completely different protocols and completely different cryptographic primitives to ensure this. And so Zcoin, it uses a zero-coin protocol, which was one of the most cited papers in the past few years with 200 citations. And Zcash has only about half as many citations as the zero-coin paper. And so one of the reasons for this is because the zero-coin paper uses cryptographic primitives that have been around for a much longer time than Zerocash, which relies on ZK snarks, which is extremely new kind of cryptographic scheme that has very little peer review amongst the general cryptographic community, and is very, very risky, but also has has potential benefits as well. With Zerocoin, it has all the same properties in practice for the user, except for hiding the transaction amounts. but it doesn't have this huge risk that Zero Cash has of potentially having things such as double spends without anybody knowing, and potentially draining hundreds of millions of dollars from the market supply, because Zcoin uses decades old cryptographic schemes that have been very well tested, very battle tested, and very well peer reviewed.
This is a question for both Gary and Riccardo. I'm wondering if you guys think that both these technologies could succeed in the future living side by side.
Well, I think any type of privacy-centric technology is the right step for humanity. Anything that's such as coin join or mixing transactions or ring signatures, those type of technologies are already a step ahead of Bitcoin. And I think there's room for all cryptocurrencies such as Darkcoin, Monero, Zero Cash. There's room for all different types of privacy-centric technologies based on the values of specific users. For example, if people value absolute privacy at the cost of a very high probability of losing money based on speculation, they can use Zcash because it has this marginal improvement over Zcoin for hiding transaction amounts. But if you want something that's a lot more balanced and that has a marginal disadvantage compared to Zcash because the transparent transaction amounts, then you should go with Zcoin. And if you want something that is based on much more, I guess, for the general public, much more well understood cryptographic schemes, you can go with something like Monero. And I think there's totally room for all cryptocurrency-centric, all privacy-centric cryptocurrencies based on your specific values.
Riccardo, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think I view things a little differently. I think that that there's definitely room for lots of possible solutions right now, but I have a very strong suspicion and belief that we are basically in an environment that is not too dissimilar from the dot-com bubble of the late 90s. And there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm and a lot of really good ideas that are very poorly executed, and a lot of really bad ideas that are very poorly executed too, and even some bad ideas that are very well executed. And I think that we're going to see a lot of projects collapsing. They're not going to be sustainable. They're not going to be well maintained. They're going to fall apart. And I'd be very interested to look back on things in 5 years' time and see what's come out of it. So that's not to say that projects can't live side by side right now, but I don't see a possibility for longevity for every single project, just purely because of the scope and the fact that ultimately markets have to decide on a small number of participants. They can't possibly support every single participant.
So you believe that there will be a prevailing technology sometime in the future?
Well, maybe not a single one, maybe a small group, maybe a small cluster of technologies. And I think there's a lot to be said for the argument that maybe Bitcoin's enough. And maybe the people that need good privacy will use tools like Join Market and other stuff that will be layered on top of Bitcoin, like Tumblebit and Mimblewimble, and other things that sound like names from TV shows. And at the end of it all, maybe that's the prevailing technology, and like all the stuff that we're doing serves that purpose ultimately by giving people learnings and understanding. And that's okay too, because the ideal outcome is that people have tools that they can use to enhance their privacy not Fluffy Pony buys himself more wine.
Right. The goal is to give users this option. It's not really about us or specific projects.
Yeah, exactly.
Gary?
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. I should have qualified the statement by saying, yes, that markets eventually will decide which values people share, and people express the power of the values through markets eventually. And there should be a shakeout eventually for a few cryptocurrencies that will lead the privacy-centric market, and also a lot of other cryptocurrencies that have a smaller user base.
I'm wondering if you guys have any questions for one another, or if you guys have any disagreements or anything about each other's technology.
So this isn't a trap at all.
No?
Yeah, if you want to go, Riccardo.
Gary, I think the only thing that I'd be interested in learning from you is why the choice of the RSA accumulator, and why not go down the road that Zurich or that Zcash had, where they built their own trusted setup, because you guys are basically hinging on the work that somebody else did and hoping that they threw away the keys.
Yeah, so Zcash uses uses a trusted setup as well, and it turns out so there's this thing called trustless RSA setup, but it's very inefficient and will lead essentially to block times that are hours long, right? And so we, in order to avoid that, to make this an actual cryptocurrency that you can send transactions with, we had to use previously generated a trusted setup by RSA Labs, which, to say the least, is not the best solution, but it's no worse or no better than Zcash's trusted setup. I also have a question about Monero. So I'm thinking about it from a perspective of, say, someone wants to sell something on the darknet, right? And so they publish their public address, or their one-time address. I'm not sure what's the exact terminology for Monero, but they publish some type of address on the darknet, and people will send money supposedly to this address. And so if this person that's say selling drugs on the darknet and wants to convert that to fiat money, how does he do that in an anonymous fashion?
You broke up there a little bit at the end. You said if he wants to do what?
If he wants to convert his Monero into a fiat currency, how does he, without being traced, how does he do that?
So pretty much the same way that he would convert Bitcoin. He'd have to use a service like Local Bitcoins and whatever to try and reduce his risk of AML KYC services. But more and more we're seeing a growth and a slow increase in the use of BitSquare, which is decentralized. And BitSquare is not, it's not in a real-time exchange for high-frequency trading. But yeah, we're seeing a sort of slow increase in people that are using it, and they're using it to go, for example, from Monero to Bitcoin, or from Bitcoin to various fiat services. And I really think that something like BitSquare is the future in terms of people wanting to shift between currencies, between hard and digital currencies at any rate, without needing to compromise their privacy.
Okay, I see. So so basically the status quo is that if you want to use an exchange that has say more than $1 million of volume, where you want to convert more than $1 million of volume, if you're someone dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars on dark nets, either you the most, by default, the most likely thing you do is sell that on an exchange where you have a trusted kind of reputation with that exchange. But you do place your trust, if you're using Monero, on that exchange operator if it is a centralized exchange. And so just a quick kind of differential for Zcoin is that if you are using Zcoin and you are selling things on the darknet, in fact, you still have perfect fungibility, even if you are someone selling drugs on a darknet and want to convert to fiat currency. There's no way that the centralized exchange operator can find out your identity, and so there's that advantage currently for Zcoin. So yeah, I do agree with you that that people will that there's a trade-off. Well, there is a trade-off between using a decentralized exchange and a centralized exchange, which is convenience, and then the potential for default by the other, by the person that's supposed to send you Bitcoins in exchange for Monero. But I guess for Monero, in order to achieve this kind of privacy, if you're doing something that's extremely dependent on privacy, you would have to use these decentralized exchanges, and it would be good to see more of those decentralized exchanges in the future.
How does
look? I think ultimately, if you're, I mean, we don't specify the use cases. If somebody wants to use Monero for something that is nefarious or for something that is benign, that's entirely their prerogative. Ultimately, if they need transactional volume and they need to move from cryptocurrency X into US dollars, then it's largely irrelevant. They're going to, they're either going to shift from something like Monero into Bitcoin into US dollars, or they're just going to have some sort of circular economy where they're paying their suppliers in Monero or cryptocurrency X or whatever, or waffle coin.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that the problem is that if you're doing one of these things, that's and I agree with you that people should be able to do whatever they want with their Monero or Zcash or Zcoin, but it doesn't actually. I'm saying with previous cryptocurrencies, and it seems like also with Monero, that if you are doing something that is that governments do not like, or is potentially completely illegal, such as selling drugs on darknets, that as of now, and based on the current exchange volumes on decentralized exchanges such as BitSquare, it's not actually possible to convert Monero into a currency that will be essentially a stable store of value. Where do I? Yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying. And with Zcoin, that it allows for that, and Zcoin and Zcash are the coins that allow for that to happen.
You're saying that with Zcoin, I can exchange my Zcoin on a centralized exchange without this exchange knowing who I am?
Oh, no. I'm saying that with Zcoin, you still have to use the KYC AML, but your coins, the actual coins, will not be associated with the coins from darknet.
Okay, like the darknet transaction.
But they wouldn't. It's the same with Monero. Monero, if you transfer Monero from your darknet market account into an exchange, the exchange would have no idea.
How so? So if you what I'm confused about, and I hope I can learn more about Monero, is if you if I'm someone, you know, selling marijuana on one of these dark nets, and I receive 10,000 Monero, now this Monero address, right, is associated with 10,000 with you know $100,000 worth of Monero, let's say. So how do I actually convert this Monero that is now tainted with tainted with the fact that it's associated with a drug dealer? How do I actually convert that Monero into fiat currency without?
I think you're confusing Monero with Bitcoin. When you transfer the Monero from the darknet market account to the exchange can't tell where it's coming from.
Oh, okay. So you're okay. So
there's unlinkability and untraceability.
Okay, so you're operating under the assumption, essentially the threat metric. I imagine. We operated under the threat model such that exchanges such as Coinbase actually, if you are sending money associated with a darknet address, they actually ban your account. And so the threat model, if you know, a privacy-centric coin is to grow and it's actually to become a concern to regulators, they would force exchanges operating in the country of interest to completely ban accounts associated with darknet addresses.
Yeah, so then every single Zcash account and Zcoin account would be banned because they are by de facto associated with darknet markets because they're untraceable. So it's the same with Monero. You can't trace a specific transaction with Monero because it appears to come from multiple transactions. So if the input, the spent input going into Coinbase appears to come from 100 old transactions on the blockchain over the past few years, there's no way of telling which of those 100 is the real one. So there's no way for you to link the metadata or the flow of the transaction. It appears to come from 100 of them, but it only actually comes from one. So as far as Coinbase is concerned, they can't tell really where it came from. They can only tell that it came from one of these 100 random addresses.
Well, there is a property such that you are more likely, for example, if you are if you have a turnover rate of selling, let's say, marijuana of $100,000 every week, right? And you need to turn over this money that you received on a maybe even daily basis, right, in order to keep profitability, right? And so there's actually you know, this is dependent on a very Bayesian assumption that that you have equal probability of someone that of a coin that is very old as being linked to a coin that is very young. So essentially, if people have been sending like $100,000 of cryptocurrency to a certain address, these $100,000 worth of cryptocurrency, these coins, chances are that they're actually newer coins rather than older coins, and so it works if the assumption is that all coins actually have an equal distribution of being the actual coin that you are trying to hide, but that distribution, you know, is very much uncertain.
That's why we use a triangular distribution so that it favors newer outputs in its selection. But more importantly, you can't tell the value. An external observer can't tell the value. And so what you really end up with is not a matter of whether Coinbase can tell the origin of it or not, but what you end up with are much more basic principles of, I have $10,000 going through my cryptocurrency trading account every day. That's a visible thing because I'm trading from one currency to the other. And the IRS would like to know where it's coming from. So now we're sort of dealing with stuff that's out of scope, because ultimately that's money laundering, and that's not something that that Monero cares about, because we don't write the use cases, we write the technology.
Well, I would say it's not very out of scope, because the IRS does want to know where the money is coming from, but the IRS has no way of knowing that if the coins are actually fungible. The IRS has no way of knowing whether these coins are actually from a darknet or not.
Yes, they do. Of course they do. The IRS has got a very simple way of knowing. They knock on your door and threaten to beat you over the head with a spanner until you tell them.
unless you have servers in other countries that's and a very decentralized operation where you're in another where you're operating in another country that isn't under the militarization of the United States, then you will have perfect fungibility, right?
No, that doesn't exist though. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have large values going through an account that you have KYC and AML'd, then chances are someone's going to knock on your door at some stage and say, buddy, where does all this money come from? And that again it's not something that a technology can stop if you use centralized exchanges with large amounts of liquidity. The only way around that, there are two ways. The first are for exchanges, decentralized exchanges like BitSquare, to become massively popular, have tons of liquidity, and everyone uses them. And the second way is for there to be a circular economy where you don't need to use an exchange, where you get paid in Bitcoin, you're paying your buddy in Bitcoin, he's paying his buddy, and then nobody's the wiser.
Well, there's kind of two issues here, right? The first issue is dealing with the issue of taint, right? You mentioned that Monero has this triangular distribution. I guess what you mean is a long tail and a kind of a fat bell curve on one side. This type of distribution.
It favors newer outputs. So if you're moving stuff every day, then it's going to favor mixing with newer outputs.
Yeah. So essentially, in that case, the anonymity set is not all the coins that have appeared throughout the blockchain's history. It's in fact just the anonymity set of the most recent coins. And from my understanding, I'm not sure how big the block size is for Monero, but if it's roughly the same as Bitcoin, it should be between 500 to 1,000 per block. And so the anonymity set, if you take just the past one day out of the past few years of Monero, say 1,000. So that's only 1/1000th of the actual maximal possible anonymity set if it operated under the assumption that all coins are equally likely to be part of the mixing set. Right.
Well, I think the two things is that firstly, there's a dynamic block size, so there's no fixed block limit. So effectively, the anonymity set grows based on demand. Even the newer anonymity set. And secondly, the other thing to consider is that what we're really talking about in that event is it gives you plausible deniability, because somebody can come and knock on the door and say, your transaction, we think is definitely one of these 1,000. And so it must be you. And you can say, what? Prove it.
Yeah, but the problem is that for example, at least in the United States, we don't actually operate, you're not very much protected from plausible deniability, because what law enforcement agencies do is that they break your Fourth, Fifth Amendment rights, they break due process rights, and they actually do things behind the scenes, as we've seen with the Silk Road case, to essentially prove a case against you without first getting a warrant. Actually, so plausible deniability in that case doesn't matter, as long as they have probabilistically a very high chance that this particular address associated with this activity, they will find a way to break your break your rights and start the case against you without even if you put up this argument of kind of plausible deniability.
Sure, but probabilistically, if you're a pizza delivery driver and you're driving a Ferrari, probabilistically you're probably selling drugs, and they can figure that out through old-fashioned police work. The same goes for if you're using Tor the whole time. There might be all sorts of compromises on your physical device, or on the Tor network and so on. So probabilistically, you're probably going to be compromised one way or the other. All you can do is layer this and add to your privacy as much as possible, and then hope that that the privacy that you're gaining in its entirety is enough. There's no magic bullet, and even something like Zero Cash, bless its heart, with 8 gigs of RAM and over a minute to create a private transaction, even with all of that, it's not a clean break. There's still a whole bunch of things that can be inferred because of the lack of private transactions being the default. And even if they were the default, there's a whole bunch of other information that can be inferred through timing analysis and so on. So there's no magic bullet, and arguing that one magic bullet is slightly better than another magic bullet is just silly. What we should be trying to do is figure out how we can enhance the circular economy so that we reduce the metadata leakage outside of that circular economy. And that means figuring out how people can earn cryptocurrency, not how people can spend it.
There's two parts of this, right? And I agree with you on this part, right? Which is that the circular economy is very important for the privacy, as you mentioned, because of the AML KYC issues. But in terms of the technology, the most important thing, and the only thing we can do is to guarantee that the technology is actually fungible, right? And so in terms of and I would say that that this kind of fungibility in terms of being able to convert your Zcoin into Bitcoin on exchange or into fiat currency without this particular address being associated with the darknets, that's not a marginal improvement. It's actually a highly significant improvement for these sophisticated actors in these darknets.
I agree, and I'm really glad that Zcoin and Monero both have that. That's an excellent improvement. Now, if only Zcoin
I'm saying that with Monero,
and hide where the payments are going to, you'd have the same trifecta as Monero does.
No, look, but I'm saying with Monero that this fungibility property of converting a tainted coin that is associated with selling marijuana in the darknets and actually by sending that money associated with that address into an exchange, you don't have that fungibility. And with Zcoin,
it's not associated with an address. It's associated with a random number. There are no addresses. Payments are made to public keys, but they're not normal public keys. They're hashed with a random, and so they appear to be random destinations within a particular transaction. You can go take a look at a Monero transaction on a block explorer, ones that don't use ring-CT, and let's say a transaction has got 10 outputs. 2 of those outputs might be to the recipient, 8 of those outputs might be change, and yet they appear to be to 10 different addresses. So we're the linkage is not as clear as you might imagine, because you can't track it.
The anonymity set is just in the past. For example, the turnover rate is every day. The anonymity set, the maximum anonymity set is 1 day's worth of transactions, and out of that, it's limited by the block size, and also if you're sending a very large amount of money, as you do if you're a big operator on darknet, that money is those amount of unspent transaction outputs, that anonymity set is actually also significantly less than just the day's worth of unspent transaction outputs.
But you can't tell the value with ring-CT. You mix. I mean, I can mix a 10,000 Monero transaction with a bunch of other transactions that are worth significantly less.
Sure, but the two network graphs essentially. There's a network graph of the transaction amount, and there's also a network graph of traceability between the addresses, of the transaction history between the addresses. And what I'm saying is that the anonymity set of this network graph for the transaction history of the addresses in the past day is a lot less than what it could be if it accompanied the entire maximal user-based anonymity set, which it does with something like Zcoin or Zcash. And,
sure.
and
so there are trade-offs with everything, but what you really want is you want to figure out, game theoretically, which trade-off is acceptable and which one is not. And I think it's pretty clear that having a having a cryptocurrency where you can't tell where it's come from, except maybe 1 in 1,000 or whatever cryptographically negligible chance you want to say, you can't tell where it's going to, because the possibilities of where it's going to are 2 to the power 256, and you can't tell the transaction amount. That's pretty powerful, regardless of some of the shortfalls, like, oh, you might be able to tell a particular input comes from 100 old transactions and newer transactions, and it might be one of those.
Yeah, well, so this is another, with another issue with all previous cryptocurrencies, including things like, Monero or CoinJoin or whatever, which is that it operates under this heuristical threat model assumption that things such as topological data analysis are not being used by these advanced institutions such as the NSA. And with topological data analysis, which is used by from things such as the NSA to break your privacy, to hedge funds trying to analyze how to best make money through the flows of financial networks, to the FBI potentially tracking down criminals. So topological data analysis, these probabilities aren't actually independent of each other. So if you have this 1 out of 1,000 times 1 out of 1,000 probability between each mixing cycle, then your chances, if these are independent probabilities, then the chances of you being traced is 1 in a million. However, with things such as topological data analysis, you can actually very easily find the kind of characteristics of this financial topology. So you can find out which addresses are most likely to be transacting with other addresses based on things such as analyzing how the clusters of addresses work with each other, and analyzing the local clusterization of these addresses. And so
there's no cluster of addresses, because each output goes to a random destination. So there's no clustering.
Well, you don't know that, right? Because first of all, you have public address information on things such as darknets or Reddit, where
but that doesn't relate to the output. The output's not paid to the 95 character address starting with the 4.
Yes,
the output is paid to a 2 to the power 256 possible destinations, and that's it. They're not related to the physical address that is posted on Reddit and the Monero donation address and all that jazz. They're completely unrelated. It's dual key stealth addressing, and so unless you physically have a way of searching that entire 256-bit key space, it's there's no correlation.
But in order to, let's say you want to combine these one-time addresses, right? You want to you have 10 Monero each. You want to combine that into one 10 Monero transaction, right? And so in that case, and if you have this data linking from whom you're sending to, you have intersection attacks. Essentially, you have the data linking from this sending these 10 different one-time addresses to one other address. Then you have actually all these keys linked to a specific transaction. And with that information, what happens is that through things such as topological data analysis, it doesn't matter kind of what type of model you have for other previous cryptocurrencies in terms of privacy. But this topological data analysis can find the underlying structure and assign probabilities, some with very high certainty, that this address is in fact linked to money laundering, or you name it. And so essentially, a similar analogy, right, is how in the modern world, where with more computing power, we've shifted from learning, such as natural language processing, from models that rely on very high set rules in order to work, and we found that those don't work very well. And instead, we shifted to convolutional neural networks that depend on a very elegant system that can find the underlying structure of language itself. And so similarly, with organizations such as the NSA, we're not actually relying on specific assumptions. It's a better practice now to rely less on specific assumptions about the topology of networks, and instead rely on the fact that something like a zero-knowledge proof can actually hide all of that data together, so that more advanced techniques such as machine learning, deep learning, or topological data analysis, even that cannot break the privacy of a zero-knowledge coin, because the data simply isn't there to do the topological data analysis.
But the data is there because the amounts aren't hidden in Zcoin's case. They're hidden in Zcash's case, but there are other failures there.
Well, with Zcoin, because there's a complete anonymity of the transaction history network graph, the amount sent isn't actually relevant to breaking its privacy.
Except it only allows you to infer data, which means that the fact that there's some breakage on the input side is largely irrelevant, because there's a whole bunch of linkage on the output side and on the amount side.
Well, if you don't know if this amount is, even if it's linked to $1 million, if you have no idea, if there's no linkage between the nodes of the transaction network, it's useless information. You just know that a specific amount might be linked to another specific amount, but you have no idea about whether this person is linked to that specific amount.
But if so let's take the hypothetical scenario where one Zcoin appears in this address. It magically appears, and then a few minutes later, one Zcoin magically appears in another address. And now you can make some correlation between the two because the amount is the same.
Well, so essentially that's another talk about the distribution of what is most when are users more likely to send Zcoins, and that alone, if you do have the distribution, then you have a higher chance of assigning the probabilities of a specific quantity linked to another specific quantity transaction, but it still doesn't break. It doesn't actually break your identity. It doesn't break the privacy.
I mean, by your own admission, we can only concern ourselves with the day's history, because users are most likely to spend coins within a day or some such, in your hypothetical. And so if your hypothetical drug dealer needs to move $10 million or $10,000 or whatever it is in a day, the amounts are going to be consistent, and it's going to be very easy to figure out where those amounts are going to and what exchange they're going to and all of that.
Well, it doesn't actually be anonymity set of Zcoin, which is the maximal anonymity set of all the previous coins since the beginning of the Genesis block. Because of that, we actually don't know which specific coin is actually linked to this darknet.
But we don't need to, because we're just looking at the amounts. So if we see the amount appears in drug dealer's account, and then the amount appears in Coinbase account, we can go, well, it's the same amount, roughly, less some transaction fee. And so therefore,
that's the best. That's, even something like Zcash, where any cryptocurrency, it cannot, if you are, let's say 10% or 50% or 90%, that operates under assumption that, you're operating a highly significant percentage of the entire trading volume of the cryptocurrency. But what I'm saying is that if you are operating,
I'm just talking about your hypothetical drug dealer moving taking $10,000 and that he's received now, withdrawing it to his personal wallet, and then going, cool, I now have this and I can send it to the exchange.
Yeah,
and
but
there's a correlation between the amounts.
If you if you have something that has, if you have, let's say someone sending 100 different people sending between 5,000 to 5,000 people sending between $5,000 to $15,000 worth of a cryptocurrency, you have no way of correlating that with Zcoin. But with Monero, you actually do have a way still of correlating that amount with the darknet address.
You can't tell the amounts. So how with Monero you can't tell the amounts at all. So I mean, you've got an amount of 0 that went to the exchange.
I'm not talking about the amount. I understand with confidential transactions, it hides the amount, but I'm saying that has no effect actually on protecting the privacy of the identities of the users, because that public, because of the fat tail distribution towards 1 day, it only encompasses that 1 day's worth of anonymity set, whereas with Zcoin it encompasses since the beginning of the Genesis block, which is literally.
So now what happens? What happens if I move coins from last week?
If you move coins from last week, well, that still applies, right? Because in 1 week under the assumption of a 1 day or 1 week or even 1 month turnover, the point is, what I'm saying is that the anonymity set is less than 1% of what it could be with something like a zero knowledge coin such as Zcoin or Zcash.
Cool. Okay. So basically, just so we're clear and we understand 100%, in this very limited scenario where you have a drug dealer who's receiving, who has to turn a certain amount over in a fixed period, and he repeats his actions over and over again. So he does the same thing every day, or he does the same thing every week. He reduces his anonymity set effectively to that short period. So even though it appears to come from 100 transactions over a period of time, it's actually only coming from a smaller subset of the transactions over a period of a week.
Well, you gave you kind of extended the specific example and assumed that it would only work for that specific example. But I'm saying it works if you alternate the times of the day you send that transaction. Obviously, you would do that in order to not get caught. If you're a dealer on the darknet, you would randomize a time or day of a week. But the fact is that those specific coins that over the past month that you have used on the darknets, there's a much higher probability, and the law enforcement agencies can use this to break your privacy and identify and say that chances are that you are the person that you're the person associated with this address on the darknets. And the probability.
But if that's the case, then and you're a drug dealer who's clever and careful, then you can just you can receive Bitcoin. You don't even need to receive anything else, and you can go from Bitcoin to Litecoin and Ethereum and back again. And there's enough breakage, and you have enough services like Shapeshift and Chain Jelly and all those other things that will allow you to do that. And there's absolutely no linkage.
Well, in the end of the day, then you're saying that things like Monero has no advantage over CoinJoin, because CoinJoin is also based on trusting a third party. So what we're saying is that with Zcoin, if you were to create a fake identity and sell things on something like a centralized Bitcoin exchange, then you do not actually need to depend on trusting the third party, trusting the centralized exchange. But with Monero and all the previous cryptocurrencies, you actually still have to trust the exchange, whether it be Shapeshift or any other privacy-centric cryptocurrency exchange. But I mean,
if you're going to use a decentralized, if you're going to use a centralized exchange, then you're going to use a centralized exchange, and you've got to trust that exchange anyway.
Well, you have to trust. Yeah. So I'm saying if the exchange, and for any kind of any exchange that does high volume will be in the United States, at least, for example, will be regulated, and they will force these exchange operators, such as they did with Coinbase, to ban accounts associated with darknet addresses. Yes, you do have to trust the exchange, but the exchange will have no way of knowing that you in fact are associated with a darknet, and that's a very
with Monero, same with Zcash. It's the same premise. We're talking about differences that are so negligible that they're not even worth discussing.
negligible. It's not negligible because of
what isn't negligible. What isn't negligible is that you can clearly see the IP, the originating IP address of transactions with most projects, with projects like Zcoin and Zcash. You can clearly see the amount that's being transacted with Zcoin. You can clearly see the destination with Zcoin. Well, I mean, if we're gonna talk about, about negligible improvements to things, let's talk about negligible improvements to things.
Well, first of all, I would say so essentially your argument lies on the premise that every innovation, so basically that Bitcoin is about as private as Zcash and Zcoin and Monero, that they're almost all these improvements marginable. And actually I actually agree that on the layer of IP addresses, that because of that these differences between these cryptocurrencies are in fact for privacy are in fact very negligible. But if we improve that primary infrastructure layer to increase the privacy for IP addresses, then we're basically I'm separating this discussion for now essentially on the privacy cryptocurrency protocol layer, and I'm saying that under the assumption of, and this is an assumption that's not true today, of under the assumption of a completely private, of a very private system that's resistant to man-in-the-middle attacks and whatnot, and resistant to IP address analysis. Under that assumption, you have a second layer, which is a cryptocurrency layer. And I'm saying that for that cryptocurrency protocol layer, the privacy inherent in Zerocoin and Zcoin, Zcash is much larger than all other previous cryptocurrencies because of the anonymity.
Sure, I'll agree with you that Zcash's privacy is top notch. That's right at that's where you like, that takes the cake. It's like top of the pops, the best privacy you could get. If only they could get Zcash to Zcash, Z address to Z address transactions working well, it would be great. But it's not there, and it uses moon math that isn't well understood by many.
It's not,
and that's a whole. I mean, that's a whole nother ball game. And then let's take it one level below, and let's talk about cryptocurrencies, privacy enhancing cryptocurrencies that are usable. And really, if you're going to create a privacy enhancing cryptocurrency that is usable, you have to close all the holes. You can't just say, well, because we're breaking the metadata linkage, it's enough. Because by that same token, confidential transaction breaks the amounts in a Bitcoin, hypothetical Bitcoin sidechain. And the same argument has been made by people like Greg Maxwell, who I deeply respect, that taking the amounts out is enough. And I disagree. I think that the what he calls the metadata, the flow of transactions, I think is just as important as amounts. But I think the opposite cannot be true as well. You cannot argue that just by breaking the transaction metadata, the flow of transactions, that is enough. I think you need to break. I think you need to prevent the amounts from being known. I think you need to prevent the destination from being known by using stealth addresses or something similar. And I think you need to use something like ring signatures or Zerocoin's protocol to break the origin of transactions. I think all three are needed, and any one is worthless on its own.
There's two things here, right? The first, actually, we are in agreement of, which is that the first layer of privacy, which is, for example, IP address anonymity, Tor itself was broken, right? And so I agree that is actually the most important part of ensuring privacy. So cryptocurrency protocol development so far has kind of abstracted that layer of infrastructure away. Eventually, hopefully we can make that infrastructure layer a lot bigger. And so what I'm saying is that if that infrastructure layer ever becomes private enough that the difference between Zcoin and Zcash and other previous cryptocurrencies is not marginal, and it's in fact highly significant. And as what you mentioned was that you think that that hiding hiding the transaction amounts is very important. What we're saying is that with Zcoin, there's, because of the fact that it's a quantum leap in terms of privacy in cryptocurrency protocols, because it's a quantum leap that allows for complete anonymity of the transaction history graph, which has not been possible before, because before for all previous cryptocurrencies, there has always been a transaction history that links nodes, that has directed edges between nodes spending their unspent transactions towards other addresses, and because of these links, you have a transaction history graph, and because of this transaction history graph, you can uncover identities through things such as topological data analysis. And with Zcoin, the network graph looks completely different. It's just random dots everywhere that shows the amount associated with dot, and it has no linkage at all between the nodes, between individual nodes, and because of that,
which is inferred.
Wait, sorry.
Except the linkage, that which is inferred.
So
I think really the best way, because I mean we can discuss this for hours, but the best way to sort of like really just succinctly explain what I'm trying to say is to put it in the words of the creators of Zcoin, because the guys who created the Zcoin protocol, in particular Myers, Green, and Garman, they are also authors of the Zero Cash paper. And in the Zero Cash paper, they say Zcoin tackles some of these privacy issues. So Zcoin, their creation, tackles some of these privacy issues by unlinking transactions from the payment's origin. Yet it still reveals payment destinations and amounts and is limited in functionality. So I guess my final question for you, because otherwise we'll be here all night, is why do you think the Zcoin authors decided to abandon that approach and take another approach using highly theoretical moon math instead of just pursuing Zcoin and building on it?
Well, yeah, actually, I had so actually, when they started the Zcash project, from my understanding is that they were considering both using Zcoin or Zero Cash as a protocol. I'm talking about the academics, and I'm talking about the white papers. I'm not talking about the Zcash scam. Okay. So there's two different things here, right? The first is the academics. They're motivated by is to explore different approaches to ensuring privacy, right? And one approach is Zcoin, which is much more stable cryptographic primitives that have been tested through decades, right? And so now, as what academics do is that they like to explore different academics, they like to sit around and they like to think about things, and they like to think about things that are either robust, and they also like to think about things that could be kind of moon math or very cutting edge, and they like to write papers on these. But that doesn't actually signify, it's actually not a signal that indicates how robust a cryptocurrency protocol is. We can speculate all day about why they wrote the Zero Cash paper, and my speculation is that they wanted, especially academics, they like to optimize things, and they also like to use cutting edge experimental technology that could completely break for all that matters. But if you analyze the Zcoin versus Zero Cash paper, it's very clear that the Zcoin paper uses much more stable cryptographic protocols. And so I think, you know, the question you asked is kind of like why would you not break from the social validation of you know, the fact that this paper is more recent? And I would argue, I would actually say that I would look at it from the flip side. Why would you not use a paper that is older, that is based on cryptographic protocols that are more proven? And so there's two different things here. There's the academics that are writing the paper, and there's the actual Zcash programmers and team that have chosen to use a zero cash paper. And I think it's very important to know that these are different, that these two things are very, very much different.
Yeah, no, they are. I just found it interesting that that the authors of the Zcoin paper chose to move on to the zero cash protocol because, by their own criticism, Zcoin is not enough.
So so there's two things, right? We don't know the extent of the involvement of in terms of coding, in terms of incentives, in terms of you know, what they're actually doing in terms of Zcash.
Well, I'm not talking about Zcash. I'm just talking about the white papers. I'm talking about the academics who worked on the Zcoin white paper and the academics who worked on the zero cash white paper. At no point in time am I talking about the Zcash scam.
Yeah, that's quite simple, actually. The Zcoin paper, because it uses cryptographic primitives that are so well tested, there's not much to improve because it's already, the security and in terms of how well it's peer reviewed, it's already top notch. And so with zero cash, the zero cash paper, there's tons of things that need to be fixed. You know, there was a bug that was found that could have caused a double spend without anybody noticing that type of attack, and they were able to find a fix for that protocol problem.
But that's Zcash.
Constantly, yeah, there's tons of things to constantly
improve. Gary, we're circling around here. We're not talking about Zcash. If you open the zero cash white paper, we're talking about right at the beginning in the zero cash white paper, where it specifies why they didn't pursue the Zcoin protocol and why they decided to create a new protocol, zero cash. It's got nothing to do with the implementation or the fairy gold attack or anything like that. It's got to do with their specific comments about their own work.
Gentlemen,
I need to let you mention it, but
okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. So for next time, go take a look at the zero cash white paper, and then we can reconvene at a later date.
I will say that the authors of the Zcoin paper, not all of them are the same as the zero cash paper. And they do know that the cryptographic primitives are much more stable in the Zcoin paper.
Ricardo, any closing comments?
This was fun. It was a lively debate. I enjoyed it. We should do it again sometime.
I think it's good for the overall aspect of the Anon community, and I really appreciate what both of you guys are doing here in the industry, because I do value my privacy, and I would like the option to use some kind of private cryptocurrency. I'm going to ask both of you real quickly if you have any links or websites or URLs you want to share with the listeners out there. So Ricardo, go ahead if you have any Monero links or social media profiles you want to share.
Sure. Well, I mean, if anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm FluffyPonyZA. And apart from the Monero subreddit and getmonero.org, if people have technical questions or questions that require long form answers, the Monero Stack Exchange is a lot of fun, and there are a lot of really fantastic answers to questions that people have already asked, and it's monero.stackexchange.com.
Great. And Gary, for Zcoin?
Yes. Zcoin, you can find our website at zcoin.tech. Zcoin, we also have a growing Slack. Questions, comments, complaints, whatever, on our Slack. And we look forward to joining our growing cryptocurrency community.
Awesome. I really appreciate you both coming on again. Thanks again, guys.
Oh, thanks, Phil.
Thanks.
Take care.